So that's what one of my desk mates said when they heard I was going to write a piece for the orchestra that I play in. She said, can we please have a nice tune? And I think it was partly that's one of the things that is often an issue for community orchestras, but it's also an issue for second violinists as well. So that comes up quite often. In the background to this paper, I think what I'll talk about initially is my experiences both in writing for non-professional groups and actually playing contemporary music in non-professional groups. Touch briefly on some of the broader issues. When I sort of ambitiously put in an abstract for this, I then suddenly thought, I meet up 6 times a year with a bunch of key informants, and I should put a survey around the orchestra that I play in and ask them what the issues are. So that's what I did, and I'll present that as well and try and pull some of that together at the end. So I guess as a composer, which is something that I've come to, I guess, more recently, I've been very aware of some of the divides between the groups that do perform, certainly the professional groups like 175 East, Troma, the Arditi Quartet, who are contemporary music specialists and have a whole kind of group of players, of composers, of conductors, audiences, quite dedicated audiences that rely on them for performances of contemporary music. We also have the professional orchestras, which have high standards of technical ability and can certainly play more challenging music. In New Zealand, do commission and play some contemporary music, will do the work. But as we probably all know, there's variable player enthusiasm for contemporary music, and so some of the players in professional orchestras are very keen and some are not. And then there's the community groups, and there's a vast number of those in New Zealand, a vast number of community choirs, community orchestras, people who play chamber music, brass bands, a whole big group of those. And I guess the main reason people are doing it is that they're self-motivated and they choose to do it. So that means they have the power to choose not to do it if they don't like the program. They can say, well, I'm terribly sorry, I'm really busy for this program, I'm not going to play for it. There's variable technical ability, so there's some things they'll struggle with. And so I guess I started out by thinking that these were 3 quite different groups, and then started thinking about the people I knew who were involved and was aware that they're less separate than we think. We are all writing for all 3 of them, or most of us are. There are players who transcend all of them, there are conductors who transcend all of them, and there are actually audience members who transcend all of them. And I think what happens in one of those groups has spin-offs and a diffusion through to other groups. So I think when we think about the differences, or when I think about the differences, there are some differences, but there are some shared issues. And all of the time, I guess what I'm thinking around is, where are the champions of new music? And they're often in unlikely places, really. I guess my experiences as a composer writing for non-professional orchestral groups is that the player ability is usually much more uneven, and that can be within a section, it can be between sections, and it certainly can be between woodwind soloists and the woodwind section. So over recent years, I've had a number of commissions to write for the orchestra that I play in. I've had some for very good string orchestras at high schools, and some for chamber music ensembles. And I can well remember writing something for a good high school string orchestra where the conductor said, all of the first violinists are grade 8 or above, there's a good front desk and second violinists, there's a good leader for the viola section and for the cello section, and the double bass has been learning for 6 months, so she can manage open strings just and a few fingers. So you're then stuck with, what do? Do I write for the lowest common denominator, or do I write for specific performers within that orchestra? Do I really tailor it for the group of people there? And there are pros and cons to that as well. There are, the pros are that you might get a really interesting piece that has some people who can do really complex stuff and some people who can't, so you can tailor it. The con is that sometimes what you find is that wonderful horn player actually isn't playing for this concert, so you've got the horn player who has no show of playing what you've written, or it may not be transferable to another community orchestra that has a different lineup and a different balance of strengths. The available instruments are much more limited. I'm always thinking, how far can I push with player discomfort? How far can I push with requesting unfamiliar sounds? How do I manage their perceptions of what are musical or unmusical sounds? Because I think every individual player has that, and so particularly for string players, they like certain sounds they make on the instruments and they don't like other sounds. And I think in community orchestras, players are often somewhat embarrassed about their technical limitations, so they're more likely to go, well, I can't play this because my technique's not good enough. The other thing that I've been aware of really when I've written is the absolutely critical importance of the conductor as the champion of my compositions. So I just keep coming back to that time and time again. It'll be interesting to see what comes up in the survey of the orchestra, but I became rapidly very aware of the vast gulf between the conductors who paid lip service to my piece, got through it as quickly as they could, rehearsed a couple of difficult bits, and the ones who really made a strenuous effort to have an understanding of their own and to convey that to the orchestra and get the orchestra on board, the ones who were able to decide strategically which were the places in the piece that were really worth working on, which ones actually this orchestra was never going to be able to master particularly, so they just had to make the best of it in a short time. I also, as a very amateurist violinist of long standing, have struggled to read handwritten or poorly notated scores. So it is really difficult. And someone said in a previous paper, we don't want to end up in a situation where we're only writing stuff that people can sight read. But the reality is that in community orchestras, lots of people are sight reading. So if things aren't really easy, I find if I can't grasp rhythms at a glance, then that's difficult. If I were a 19th century second violinist and I came across the second violin part for the last movement and that was all I had of any of Schubert's symphonies, I would never listen to Schubert again. They're absolutely appalling if that's all you've got. So one of the struggles for me as a performer when I get a piece of music is that I kind of look at it and think, is this a section solo? I'd definitely practice that, Is this an effect? No, I'm not going to practice that. And does my part need to be this difficult to get the effect I want? And then I just wanted to say as a performer something about microtonal music. And it really requires that the tones and the semitones are in tune. And that's not an assumption you can safely make with many community orchestras. So you do have to try and envisage, and we have to try and envisage how something will sound if the whole piece is being played ever so slightly out of tune for most of it. I guess also as a player, I've been aware of player ambivalence. I had to weather people sitting next to me and saying, my God, what was that composer thinking of doing there? But also the times when suddenly the light goes on and someone, after we've been rehearsing it, says, I didn't like this to start with, but I really like that bit where the oboe comes in and then we're playing this. So people start to take ownership of the piece. There is also always insufficient rehearsal time, and I'm really aware that the conductor allocates the rehearsal time. So it's the priority that the conductor puts on it that says how much time this amateur orchestra who can't play the notes is going to spend on our piece. As we know, and I'll just skip through this, there's a long history of initial discomfort and resistance to new musical ideas, and in the last paper we were talking about the tension between composers' creative ideas and wishes and performers and listeners, with a number of now sort of iconic quotes that have been there. But when you start to look at it, there's remarkably little written that guides composers in writing for amateur or non-professional orchestras, other than a list of instrument pitch ranges for professional and non-professional players. That's kind of the best you get, really, when you start to write for amateur orchestras. And there's almost nothing in the way of critical appraisal of music that's written primarily for amateur groups. So that actually means that often when we're going into doing it, we don't have much guide about, what we're doing. And I guess that's why I ended up looking at a survey of the players of St Matthew's. I think this is a really important area to think about in New Zealand, because actually there are limited performance opportunities of new music with professional groups or orchestras, and as I said before, there's a large body of amateur orchestras and other groups. And my experience has been that they are interested in playing new music, but they find it quite difficult. So when I started thinking about what do we do to make it a bit easier, I thought I would go to the source. And so these were the sorts of questions I was thinking about. I knew that I could get the people I play with to fill out a survey. So I'm the tea lady for the orchestra, so they kind of owe me. They were prepared to fill in surveys, and I gave them chocolate biscuits afterwards. So, this is the level of research rigour we have here. But it is interesting to think about the role of player preference and their willingness to play new music. Are there particular compositional or notational issues that make it difficult? And to look for players at how critical did they see the conductor in supporting, and how important is it for them that they have contact with us? So what were they thinking about that? So St Matthew's Chamber Orchestra is a fairly well-established non-professional orchestra. It has 6 concerts a year. It's like many other community orchestras around the country. It has a professional music director, conductors and soloists. Usually about 2 works per year are ones that have been composed in the last 25 years. And I got players to complete the survey over a couple of days, so I managed to get 36 of the 44 players who were playing in this particular concert, which was one that included a Haydn symphony, a Schubert symphony, Tchaikovsky Rococo variations, and a piece by Alex Taylor. So this year we have short pieces commissioned for every concert. So when I looked at the data, you can see that it was predominantly strings in the orchestra, woodwind and brass. The percussions were away on the days that I saw them, and you can see that it's a mature orchestra. So really only 5% of the players are under the age of 30. The majority of the players are between 30 and 60, and there's a few who are older than that. This is a group who play in lots of other orchestras and lots of other chamber music groups. So you can see that actually a relatively small number of the players, in fact, only 17% of the group only play in St Matthew's Chamber Orchestra. So the others are playing in other orchestras and bands. And the big pink, the white group are actually playing in more than 3 other orchestras and bands. So this is quite an active. Some of the players are semi-professional, so they'll take paid gigs with other groups as well. So the questions that I was asking them were a couple around their personal beliefs about contemporary music, which I defined as any work that had been written in the last 25 years. And whether they thought that orchestras like St Matthew's should be playing contemporary music and should be commissioning it. And then some much more specific questions about what factors influence people's willingness to play. So you can see that with the questions around I enjoy listening to contemporary music, over 90% of the players said they enjoyed it mostly or sometimes. Everyone would attend a concert that had at least one contemporary music. But 50% of the players said I would never go to a concert that was entirely made up of contemporary works. So 50% of the players in the orchestra would never go to a Karl-Heinz concert or to a 175 East concert. And you can see that there's a small number who never enjoy performing contemporary music, but most of them sort of are okay about it. So the majority of the players believe that non-professional orchestras should include it in the program. The majority of them sometimes or mostly think we should commission it, and actually 70% said they would never hesitate to play in a program that had at least one contemporary piece in it. But when I asked them, well, do you have colleagues or friends who would hesitate, then that number went really down. Not me, but my friend probably wouldn't want to play in a program that had a contemporary work in it. When we looked at the influences on the willingness to play a contemporary work, then relationship with the composer was a little bit important, but not the overriding thing. So you can see that having played works by this composer or heard works, knowing the composer, that made a difference. The composer is a member of the orchestra, that might be somewhat important. Well, you know, I was giving out the survey, so it probably influenced them, although all of these were anonymous. So you can see that. However, to my mind, where the real oil is, what are the things that really make a difference for the players? And the most important thing is that the conductor shows enthusiasm and has a really positive attitude. So when you look at all of these players, some of whom don't like contemporary music, what they're saying is if the conductor's really enthusiastic and absolutely on side, that makes a big difference to my willingness to play. And obviously the rehearsal time's really important, and the conductor determines that. So I think this just reaffirmed the critical role of the conductor and suggests that we should be targeting conductors. When we looked at the other things, it came back to that absolute bugbear. You know, we sweat blood writing this piece and then extract the parts and send it off. And actually, my part is poorly laid out, the notation is poorly explained, makes an enormous difference to people's willingness. So the stuff that feels kind of a bit trivial to us actually is really important. People like to make sounds that they like, they're afraid of damaging their instrument, and then a few other things that actually probably didn't weigh in so much. So technical difficulty, discernible tune, whether we're willing to make changes as composers, whether they're extended techniques, they weren't too fussed about that. The free comments were interesting, but half of the players included free comments. And so I kind of clustered these into prevailing themes, and we'll just have a quick look at some of them. Players liked works where they had a sense of the overall coherence, development, and shape of the work. So these are some of the quotes. The bigger sense of the piece is sometimes not apparent to the individual. Another player said, I most enjoy works that have a clear thematic material, not necessarily melodic, that undergoes development in the course of the work, so a sense of a kind of structure. And from a player who's played a lot of contemporary music, both within New Zealand for high-level groups and also in Europe, she wrote her name on the piece and handed it to me, but she said, you know, I find it a lot easier to be a performer than a listener, because if you're the performer, you have a chance and the opportunity to get to know the music, and that makes a real difference. Access to program notes or having the composer attend a rehearsal helped players understand what was intended and what they were trying to achieve. So I don't think that means that we have to prostitute ourselves by saying, you know, this was driven by my midnight vision of X, Y, and Z, but having some sense of what we're trying to achieve and communicating that to the players makes a big difference. So people commented about the value of the conductor understanding that, or the composer attending rehearsals, having access to program notes when they first get the music rather than seeing it for the first time at the concert, and stressing the importance of people keeping an open mind. Players spoke of needing complex rhythms and extended techniques to serve a very clear purpose if they're going to be used. They disliked feeling that such techniques or complexity were being used for no particular purpose that they could discern. So again, obviously this is their opinion, but they're saying if I can't see what the person's trying to do, it makes it really hard. So a number of comments there that you can read, and people's feeling that sometimes they weren't clear what the purpose of that was. Clear notation was really critical, clear scores, things that were relatively idiomatic. So I guess just to kind of conclude, because I know we're running out of time, I think all of us would have contact with orchestras and groups, and I think working with those orchestras and groups and getting to know them and having a relationship with them makes a really big difference. Conductors are critical to our work, so if we're wanting to write for non-professional groups, we really need to develop relationships with the people who conduct for those groups. We need to explain what we're doing to the orchestra and think carefully about what we're asking the players to do and why, and notation and layout, it just is a really big issue for non-professional players. And I'd just like to thank my colleagues in the orchestra who were prepared to fill out and answer all my questions. Thank you.